It was a warm July evening in the quiet suburb of Elmswood, Illinois, and the air buzzed with the sound of children laughing, bicycles rattling over sidewalks, and the soft hum of lawn sprinklers turning in rhythmic arcs. On Maple Crest Lane, a cul-de-sac tucked away behind old oaks and manicured hedges, the neighborhood kids had gathered for what had become a summer tradition, one last game of hide-and-seek before bedtime. Lucy Patterson, a curious and clever 7-year-old with freckled cheeks and a stubborn streak, was among them. Her brown hair was tied back in 2 uneven pigtails, and she wore her favorite red sneakers, the ones with the worn-out soles and a small hole near the toe. She had just finished a popsicle, her lips stained purple as she crouched low beside the white picket fence that lined the Wilkins' backyard. Her mother, Erin Patterson, watched from the porch swing, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand, her eyes darting between her daughter and the golden hour sun that was beginning to dip behind the rooftops. Erin always insisted on watching, half for safety, half for the sentimental ache she felt knowing these moments were fleeting. Across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Singh chatted over their evening stroll, and the air was filled with the faint scent of grilled chicken from the Jeffries' backyard barbecue. Everything felt familiar, comfortable, safe. The children were counting off turns. Jamie and Marcus, 2 doors down, argued over who was it last time. Tensions flared and quickly faded. Eventually, they agreed. Lucy whispered something to her friend Ellie, then bolted across the lawn to find a hiding spot. The game began. 10 kids scattered in all directions. Some ducked behind hedges, others climbed low trees or squeezed behind sheds. Lucy disappeared behind her grandmother's old garden shed, a place she had used before. It was small, wooden, with ivy climbing up the back and an old, faded lattice screen half covering the bottom. It was clever. It was quiet. It was perfect. The countdown ended. The seeker began. One by one, children were found, giggles gave away hiding places, and shouts of joy echoed down the street. Except Lucy. No one could find Lucy. At first, they thought it was just a really good hiding spot. They called her name, teased her about how she might win this time, but still, no sign of her. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Erin stood from the porch, the swing creaking behind her. A mother's instinct pulled at her ribs. The game shifted from fun to unease. The other kids noticed too. Their laughter faded into confusion. They retraced steps, knocked on doors, checked behind trees and under porches. Still no Lucy. Erin ran to the shed. She called out, crouched down, and looked behind it. Her voice began to crack, calling louder. No response. Her red sneakers were gone. Not even a print in the mulch. Ellie, still clutching a dandelion, said she saw Lucy go that way. That way, toward the back of the shed. Toward the alley where the fence was broken. Where the woods began. Within the hour, the police were there. Flashlights danced across lawns. Neighbors were pulled from their dinners. Dogs barked. Voices shouted. They searched the woods, the creeks, the old construction site down the hill. Helicopters with thermal imaging came before dawn. They found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a thread of clothing. Not a single trace. Lucy Patterson had vanished during a simple game of hide and seek, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The investigation would span weeks, then months. Erin became a familiar face on the local news, her eyes hollow, clutching the last school photo of her daughter. She stopped sleeping. She stopped eating. Her husband, Mark, took to drinking. They blamed each other. They blamed themselves. Eventually, he left. The house remained the same. The porch swing untouched. The red sneakers never found. Only a small purple popsicle stick, left near the garden shed, slowly faded in the sun. What made it harder was how normal the day had been. No signs of struggle. No suspicious strangers reported. No camera footage from the few homes with security systems. The moment of disappearance was so ordinary, so fast, it defied logic. People whispered. Some blamed coyotes. Others claimed the woods were cursed. But no one truly believed that. They all knew something else had happened. Something no one could see. Years would pass. The town would heal on the surface, but everyone remembered Lucy. Her posters stayed up longer than most. Some weathered and torn, some replaced by strangers who never met her. Her mother never left town. Erin stayed in that house, mowing the lawn herself, hanging white ribbons every July, keeping the porch light on every night since. She waited, because something inside her refused to believe Lucy was gone. She wasn't. She couldn't be. The days following Lucy Patterson's disappearance unfolded in a slow-motion nightmare, thick with silence and dread. In the once vibrant cul-de-sac of Maple Crest Lane, laughter disappeared. Lawnmowers went unused. Porches that had been dotted with conversation and coffee mugs stood empty. Curtains stayed drawn longer than usual. Mothers held their children a little tighter, and fathers walked them to school, even when it meant being late to work. Erin Patterson remained rooted to her home, her skin growing pale under the weak kitchen light, her eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. Every hour was measured by the ticking of the kitchen clock, each minute mocking her with the question she could never stop asking. Where had Lucy gone? It made no sense. Her daughter had been in the yard, then behind the shed, then nowhere. A search effort had followed swiftly. The local police, backed by county and state officers, combed through the woods that stretched for 3 miles behind the neighborhood. Dogs barked and handlers shouted and lights moved like restless ghosts through the underbrush. But Lucy was not there. Not a scarf, not a shoe, not a drop of blood. They brought in divers for the narrow creek that ran behind the Wilkins property. The water was shallow and slow-moving, barely enough to soak your knees, but protocol demanded they check. They found nothing. Detectives tried to reconstruct a timeline. The kids said the game started at 6:10. Lucy had been last seen just before the count began. Ellie, her best friend, insisted Lucy was crouching behind the shed. That was where she saw her disappear, skipping lightly around the side, waving once, and then gone. It made sense to focus on the shed. Police examined it thoroughly. The wooden frame was solid, and the crawl space beneath was shallow, mostly tangled with old roots and spider webs. They found only one thing unusual. The back fence that marked the boundary between the Patterson property and the thin alley beyond had a missing slat. Not new, not fresh, but large enough for a child to slip through. Past that fence was the alley, and past the alley was a stretch of abandoned land meant for development years ago. Scrubland, cracked concrete, the foundation of a project that never began. A single power pole stood there, and from it dangled a tattered strand of wire. One officer noted how the grass near the hole in the fence was slightly bent. That alone was not much. No footprints, no drag marks, just bent grass. Still, they followed it. They spread their search wider, pushing into the outskirts of the construction site, and even knocking on doors farther down the highway. Nothing came up. The only piece of tangible evidence came 3 days after Lucy vanished. A security camera on the corner house across from the Pattersons had been positioned perfectly to catch anyone entering or leaving the street. The camera itself had not worked for months, but the owners, the Vargas family, recently reinstalled a new one and left the old footage card in as backup. By some technical glitch, that card still retained partial data. A tech expert from the department tried to extract it, and what they found was both compelling and frustrating. The footage from July 14th between 5:58 p.m. and 6:18 p.m., the exact window Lucy vanished, was completely corrupted. Static replaced the video. A thin band of warbled black and white with sound that resembled distant wind. All other footage from before and after remained intact. The gap was only 20 minutes long, and no amount of digital cleaning could restore it. People began to talk. They whispered that someone had tampered with the footage. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who knew Lucy. The police conducted interviews up and down Maple Crest Lane. Every house, every family. They searched basements, garages, cars. Some cooperated eagerly. Others, reluctantly. One neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, had an outburst when questioned, claiming the cops were wasting time harassing the innocent. She had lost her son in a car accident the previous year, and grief had worn her thin. Another neighbor, Mr. Haver, owned several dogs that barked incessantly every night. When pressed, he admitted the dogs had barked on the evening of the 14th, but that they always barked. It was a habit. The animals barked at shadows, at leaves. Nothing unusual. But that was the theme. Nothing was ever unusual. That was what made it worse. Erin began reviewing every memory she had of that day. She tried to find some detail she might have missed. A strange car. A passing jogger. Anything. But nothing came. The day had been simple, uneventful. She had been on the porch. She had seen Lucy run behind the shed. Then she had blinked, and the world had changed. She called her husband, even though he had not returned her messages. She begged him to come home. He refused. Said he couldn't look her in the eyes. Not yet. Said he blamed himself. Erin no longer had the strength to argue. She stopped picking up the phone after that. The house grew quiet. Food went uneaten. The dog refused to sleep in Lucy's room. pawing at the door and whining until Erin let him into her bed. The authorities offered therapy. Erin declined. Her grief was too sharp, too raw to process through polite conversation. Instead, she stayed home, barely functioning, her mind looping endlessly around the same point. What had happened in those 20 minutes? The detectives were persistent at first. Then came the silence. They stopped visiting, stopped calling. The media circus had long moved on. A new case in a nearby county took over headlines. Lucy's name faded from the news, then from social feeds, then from conversation. But Erin kept looking. She posted new flyers when old ones curled at the corners. She filed records with missing persons registries. She opened a folder on her laptop and named it Lucy, filling it with every report, every witness interview, every threadbare clue. She pinned a map to her wall with every place Lucy might have gone. The seasons changed. Leaves fell and snow followed. In winter, Erin found herself staring at Lucy's empty closet, touching the clothes that no longer smelled like her daughter. Her therapist said grief was not linear. Erin thought grief was circular. She woke and slept in the same loop. On the first spring after Lucy's disappearance, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a single sentence typed on old paper. She is not gone. As the season shifted across Elmswood and the world moved forward without pause, the Patterson home remained suspended in a state of quiet mourning. The white paint on the picket fence began to peel, and weeds crept up through the cracks in the front walkway. But Erin Patterson barely noticed. Her days bled together in a monotony shaped by grief and obsession. Each morning she would wake up before dawn, brew a pot of coffee she rarely finished, and return to her growing archive of Lucy's case. The laptop became an extension of her body, the glow of the screen lighting her sleepless eyes deep into the night. She built a digital map that spanned far beyond the town's limits, connecting reports of missing children, transient individuals, unexplained sightings, and every shadow that remotely resembled Lucy's name. Her neighbors no longer asked how she was. They stopped bringing casseroles. Some waved with tight smiles from across the street. Others crossed to the other sidewalk. No one wanted to confront the lingering reminder that children could disappear while playing hide and seek, that a girl could vanish while her mother watched from the porch. No one wanted to believe what had happened could happen again. The flyers Erin posted every other week remained untouched by the city maintenance crews. It had become an unspoken rule that no one would remove them, even when they faded under rain and sun. People let them stand, yellowing edges and all, as a silent tribute or perhaps a symbol of unease they could not name. Lucy's room became a memorial frozen in time. Her bed remained made the way she had left it, sheets tucked in on one side and the blanket folded halfway down, her stuffed animals still perched by the pillow in quiet ranks. The calendar above her desk remained on July, a bright sunflower page smiling with numbers that no longer held meaning. Erin would often sit in the small pink chair near the window and just stare at the trees beyond the yard, waiting for some shift in the wind, some break in reality that might let her daughter return. The backyard shed, once an ordinary structure used for gardening tools and old chairs, became a place of pilgrimage. Erin would walk there each day with her coffee in hand and stand silently in front of it. She replaced the broken fence slat herself. She planted flowers around the base. But even in the face of these rituals, nothing changed. Lucy did not return. The police no longer called. The detectives who had once promised breakthroughs now worked other cases. Files were moved into archives, and the silence that followed felt like a second loss. In the third year, Erin took a job at a local bookstore just to keep herself from slipping too far into the dark. She worked early shifts, stocking shelves and cataloging deliveries, and spent her evenings back in the digital maze she had created on her laptop. It was there she began to notice something unusual. Each July, without fail, a lavender ribbon would appear on her front porch, tied neatly around the porch light. The first year she thought it had been left by a friend, a quiet gesture of support. The second year she asked around, but no one admitted to it. By the third year, she waited for it, heart pounding each morning in the week leading up to the anniversary. It arrived exactly on the 14th of July, always before sunrise, always tied in the same precise loop. She placed each ribbon in a small wooden box under her bed, treating them as sacred relics. By the fifth year, Erin's obsession had begun to bear subtle changes in her behavior. She started visiting other families of missing children. She joined forums, then private chat groups, then traveled to regional conferences where parents shared stories and investigators offered theories. At one event, a former detective showed her a technique for photo aging. Using specialized software, Erin began generating images of Lucy as she might look at 12, 13, 14 years old. She printed them on fresh flyers and updated the online pages she had created. People began to recognize her from those pages. She became a name in missing persons advocacy circles, a quiet symbol of persistence and unresolved loss. It was around this time that something else happened. A stranger began leaving messages in the comment sections of Lucy's profile pages. The messages were brief and vague, phrases like "she is not gone" or "you are looking in the wrong place." At first, Erin ignored them. Then she started documenting the usernames and IP logs. When she reported the activity to the authorities, they said it was likely a cruel hoax, someone feeding off her pain. But Erin felt differently. There was something about the timing, the language, the way the messages appeared and then disappeared just as quickly. She began to suspect they were not random. She printed them out and pinned them to her wall beside the map. Around the same time, she received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small, clear bag containing a single bead, purple with a gold star in the center. It was the same kind of bead that had been on the bracelet Lucy wore that summer, a craft bracelet she had made herself at Vacation Bible School just weeks before she vanished. Erin stared at it for hours before calling the police. They took the bead, logged it as evidence, promised to investigate. But no follow-up ever came. When she asked for updates, they said the DNA traces were too degraded to be useful. Despite the lack of resolution, Erin began to feel something different. Not closure, not even hope, but a shift, like a wind turning in a new direction. She started noticing patterns in the messages and dates. She noticed that each year on the anniversary, besides the ribbon, a faint scent of lavender seemed to cling to the porch steps. It was always gone by midday. She mentioned this to no one. She wrote it down. She recorded everything. In the 5th summer, as dusk rolled over the cul-de-sac, she sat once again on the porch, eyes fixed on the shed, wondering for the 1000th time how a child could vanish in 20 minutes. She did not see Lucy that day, but something had changed. She felt it in her bones, in the silence of the street, in the subtle tremor of the wind that brushed against her cheek and carried, for just a moment, the unmistakable sound of a child's giggle echoing from the woods. By the summer of the 6th year, Erin Patterson had grown used to silence. It became a second language to her, a rhythm she understood better than conversation, a texture she could feel in the spaces between each unanswered question. Her days had stabilized into a careful balance of routine and obsession, her mornings starting early with strong black coffee and her evenings ending late with the glow of her laptop screen casting pale light across her weary face. She had filed away every document, photograph, and clue into a meticulously organized system, complete with color-coded tags and cross-referenced files. Her walls remained covered with notes, maps, and aging photographs, and her mind stayed locked inside a single moment from 6 years ago that had never truly ended. The lavender ribbon appeared on July 14th just as it had every year prior, this time tied slightly looser than usual and left without so much as a trace of disturbance on the doormat. Erin had awoken at 4:15, her internal clock honed by grief and anticipation, and when she opened the door, the ribbon was already there, its soft color glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. She stared at it for a long moment before taking it gently in her hand and adding it to the box under her bed where the others rested like fragile artifacts. Something about this ribbon felt different, less pristine, slightly frayed along one edge as if it had been handled often before arriving at her door. Erin pressed it to her face and thought she could still detect the faint scent of lavender, floral and familiar, and yet somehow sharper than before. Later that week, as she reviewed a stack of physical files she had compiled from online databases and mailed records, her gaze fell on a faded photo of Lucy wearing her backpack during the last week of school. Erin had looked at this picture hundreds of times, but something new caught her eye now. Her fingers trembled slightly as she leaned closer. Dangling from the zipper of the backpack, just visible in the corner of the image, was a small silver charm shaped like a book. Erin remembered it well. Lucy had picked it out at the school book fair and insisted on clipping it to her bag as a sign she was going to write her own stories one day. It had not been listed among the missing items in the police report. It had never been found. Erin felt the sudden urgency of something old waking up inside her. She opened her laptop and began sorting through the hundreds of photographs she had stored there, cross-checking them for the charm. In one of the last pictures Lucy had taken on Erin's phone, during a play date with Ellie, the charm was clearly visible, swinging from the side of her bag in the sunlight. This time, Erin did not stop at confirmation. She posted the image to a private group she had joined for families of missing children, asking if anyone had seen an item like it turn up in pawn shops, second-hand stores, or public lost and found databases. Most replies were sympathetic but unhelpful. One message, however, stood out. It came from a woman named Sandra in a small town 2 hours south of Elmswood. She claimed she had seen a charm exactly like the one in Aaron's post hanging from a child's backpack at a weekend flea market. The market had passed already, but Sandra remembered the vendor, a man who sold reclaimed clothing and miscellaneous school supplies from boxes marked as donations. She did not know the vendor's name, but she offered to drive to the market grounds and see if he would be there the following weekend. Aaron replied immediately, expressing both urgency and gratitude. When Saturday came, Aaron drove down to the town herself, arriving at the flea market just after sunrise. The vendors were already setting up beneath faded canopies and plastic tables lined with clothes, books, and knickknacks. Aaron moved through the rows quickly, her heart pounding harder with each booth she passed. She found him near the southern end of the lot, an older man with gray hair tucked under a baseball cap and hands that moved slowly but deliberately as he unpacked a cardboard box filled with children's backpacks. Aaron's eyes scanned the contents with practiced intensity, searching for a flash of silver, a scrap of red strap, a familiar outline. Then she saw it. Near the bottom of the box, beneath a pile of notebooks and pencil cases, lay a pink and purple backpack with a silver charm shaped like a book clip to the zipper. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached in and picked it up, her fingers trembling as she turned it over. The zipper was worn. The strap was slightly frayed, but the charm was unmistakable. It was Lucy's backpack. The vendor glanced at her with mild disinterest as she turned to him and asked where he had gotten the box. He scratched his cheek and said he received mixed donations through a friend who worked with a local storage auction company. Items left behind and unpaid units were often boxed and donated en masse. Aaron pressed him for more, asking for names, addresses, anything that could point her toward the original owner. The vendor grew defensive, muttering about privacy and policies. Aaron handed him all the cash in her purse, buying the entire box just to keep it. She carried it back to her car, the backpack resting in her lap like something fragile and sacred. When she returned to Elmswood, she took the backpack to the police station and demanded they reopen Lucy's file. The officer on duty looked at her with a mix of recognition and weariness, but when she showed him the charm, he froze. The backpack was processed into evidence, and a new detective named Alan Cray was assigned to follow up. Aaron met with him the next day. Cray was younger than most of the other detectives she had dealt with before, more alert, less hardened by years of dead ends. He listened carefully, asked smart questions, and promised to track the donation's origins. Within a week, Cray had traced the box back to a storage unit located on the outskirts of a rural town near the state line. The unit had been abandoned nearly 2 years ago, its contents sold off after multiple missed payments. The name on the lease was an alias, but security footage from the storage facility showed a figure visiting the unit on and off over several months. The grainy video offered little detail, but one frame showed a young girl, partially obscured, stepping out of the vehicle that entered the property. Her hair was longer. She looked older, but her posture, her face, even in low resolution, bore a haunting resemblance to Lucy. Detective Alan Cray stood at the center of the narrow conference room inside the Elmswood Police Department, staring at the grainy still image pulled from the storage facility's security footage. He had seen countless missing person cases during his early career in neighboring counties, most of them cold and heavy with hopelessness. But something about this one felt different. He studied the girl's posture, the shape of her jaw, the way she turned slightly away from the camera as if to avoid recognition. Even through the static-laced image and the poor angle, there was something undeniably familiar. He zoomed in on the backpack strap hanging from her shoulder. Though the details were faint, the color scheme appeared to match the very bag Aaron Patterson had handed over to evidence just days earlier. Alan knew that with this kind of circumstantial evidence, he needed more before he could make a real move. But he also knew that time was once again beginning to matter in a case that had once seemed timeless. Aaron returned to the station 3 days later. Her hair had been tied back in a way that revealed the deep fatigue in her face, but her eyes burned with urgency. She had not slept since Alan first showed her the still image. She insisted the girl was Lucy. Alan told her he believed her, but reminded her that confirmation would require more than resemblance. He had already filed requests for DNA matching and was working through the channels necessary to obtain ownership records of the storage unit. Aaron listened carefully, nodding with tight lips. Then she handed him a new item. She had visited a local thrift store near the flea market and found another object that had once belonged to her daughter, a paperback book with Lucy's name written on the inside cover in her uneven second-grade handwriting. It had been tucked into a bin marked clearance. Aaron believed it had come from the same source as the backpack. Alan logged the item and sent it to the lab. The next day, a match returned from the zipper of the backpack. The DNA found on the charm matched Lucy's profile. She had touched it within the last 18 months. That revelation changed the trajectory of the case. The department shifted resources. Alan was granted access to archived files. The old investigators were called in for consultation. For the first time in years, there was movement. Aaron began to be seen differently, not as a grieving mother unable to let go, but as someone who had never been wrong. She sat in every meeting, contributed to every theory, and pointed out connections the team had overlooked. Alan respected her insight. He did not treat her as fragile. He treated her like someone who knew her daughter better than anyone else ever could. Together, they revisited the timeline of Lucy's disappearance. They went over every interview. They re-examined the corrupted camera footage from the neighbor's home and sent it to a new digital lab out of state, one specializing in forensic video recovery. Weeks passed. While they waited, Alan drove out to the rural storage facility. He stood inside the empty unit, the air thick with dust and the smell of mold. He studied the pattern of scuff marks on the floor, the traces of old tape on the walls. Something about the space suggested it had been lived in temporarily. He questioned the manager, an older man with a loose grasp of record-keeping. The man could not remember much, but admitted that the tenant had paid cash and never provided ID. He did recall that the man drove a brown panel van with tinted windows and that on at least 2 occasions, the girl had waited in the passenger seat while he entered alone. Alan requested surveillance data from nearby traffic cams and gas stations, piecing together a broader picture of movement. He found footage of the same van fueling up 2 towns over, license plate partially obscured, the timestamp matching the date of one of the recorded visits to the storage unit. Back in Elmswood, Erin received a call from her sister in the next county. Her sister worked part-time at a local community center and had seen a girl who bore a resemblance to Lucy walk past the building during a volunteer event. The girl had been with a woman, mid-40s, quiet, with dark sunglasses and a heavy coat despite the warm weather. The girl had paused to look at a mural, and for a brief moment, Erin's sister was convinced she recognized her eyes. Alan drove out the same day and interviewed multiple witnesses. The mural had been a local project for children's mental health. It featured dozens of small handprints painted in bright colors. Among them, one handprint was labeled with the name Lucy, written in red ink. It might have been coincidence. It might not. Alan requested fingerprint analysis, but doubted the results would come quickly. He took a photo and showed it to Erin. She stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling. She could not say for certain it was Lucy's print, but the writing style looked eerily familiar. The investigation now had multiple leads. The brown panel van became a central focus. The department placed a regional alert and began cross-referencing similar vehicles associated with custody disputes, foster placements, and off-grid living communities. They uncovered a case from 7 years earlier involving a woman named Margot Hale who had lost custody of her niece after a family dispute. Margot had a history of mental instability, had relocated several times, and had been briefly connected to an unlicensed foster operation that was shut down for noncompliance. Alan pulled her file. Her last known vehicle was a brown panel van registered under a different name. Her last known address was abandoned, but neighbors remembered her caring for a girl named Lucy. When shown a childhood photo of Lucy Patterson, 2 neighbors confirmed she looked similar. Erin was present when Alan received confirmation from a surveillance cam in a nearby border town. The van had crossed a bridge 3 weeks prior. The timestamp coincided with the weekend Erin had found the backpack. The passenger in the van appeared to be a teenage girl with long brown hair. Her face was turned toward the window, away from the camera, but the outline of her jaw, the slight tilt of her head, the curve of her cheek, everything matched Lucy. Alan requested further footage. The department contacted border authorities. They issued a bolo. They began monitoring known associates of Margot Hale. They traced her former mail records to a cabin property registered under a shell company. Alan and 2 other officers made the trip 3 days later. The cabin was empty. The windows were shuttered. The interior had signs of recent occupation, but no current inhabitants. In the fireplace, they found the remains of burned papers, mostly unreadable. One page, partially intact, showed the name Lucy Patterson written in faint pencil near the corner. The investigation no longer moved in slow circles. Each new day pressed forward with weight and acceleration, like a stone rolling downhill with no way to stop. After finding Lucy's handwriting in the ashes of the fireplace at the remote cabin, Detective Alan Cray returned to Elmswood with a different posture. He was no longer a man clinging to faint trails of evidence. He was a man following the momentum of truth that was finally beginning to surface. Erin met him at the station the following morning. Her fingers were clasped tightly around a small black notebook she had begun carrying with her everywhere. In it were all the patterns she had logged over the past year, from the lavender ribbons to the anonymous messages online. She was convinced they were connected to the figure who had taken Lucy, and she wanted Alan to see it laid out plainly, not as a theory, but as a sequence of facts. He listened carefully, flipping through the pages as she spoke, noting how the timing of each ribbon corresponded almost exactly with key moments in the investigation, including the dates the backpack and the book were discovered. There was too much alignment to dismiss as coincidence. Alan brought in a behavioral analyst from Chicago named Dr. Wyatt Elkins. Dr. Elkins reviewed the notes and immediately identified a pattern of controlled interaction, someone who wanted to be noticed but remained just out of reach, someone creating a trail that never allowed a full capture. Someone who watched every step from a distance. Erin sat across from Dr. Elkins in the small conference room and described the voice messages she had saved on her old landline, recordings she had almost erased before deciding to keep. She played one for him. It was barely audible, muffled under static, the voice low and androgynous. The only words clearly heard were "she is not gone" and "find the voice in the wires." Dr. Elkins narrowed his eyes at the phrasing and asked to hear it again. He then requested the full voicemail history from the phone provider and had their audio specialists enhance the remaining messages for analysis. One message stood out. It was shorter than the rest and arrived precisely on the 5th anniversary of Lucy's disappearance. It contained only one line, spoken slowly and with emphasis. "She listens when the wind turns." Erin had never been able to decipher it, but something about the phrasing chilled her every time. Dr. Elkins suggested they review archived weather patterns, noting that the message implied either a physical or symbolic response to the change in wind direction. Alan contacted the National Weather Service and retrieved local reports from the anniversary date. At approximately 5:27 in the morning on July 14th, a shift in wind had occurred in Elmswood, moving from east to north, a rare but documented occurrence due to a nearby storm system. Erin then recalled a sound she had heard that very morning just after she stepped out to retrieve the ribbon, a faint hum that lasted no more than a few seconds and had seemed to come from the power lines above her house. Alan requested access to utility records and confirmed that an electrical fluctuation had occurred in the grid at 5:28, less than 1 minute after the wind shift. He followed up with the local power company and was informed that similar surges had occurred on the same day every year, sometimes slightly earlier or later, always within a window tied to sunrise. Dr. Elkins proposed a theory that the person involved in Lucy's disappearance had used the infrastructure of the town itself as part of their pattern, not just symbolically but literally. He suggested reviewing street camera recordings along Maple Crest Lane during those wind shifts, even if the cameras had been presumed inactive. Alan pulled every available frame. Most cameras showed nothing of note. But one, a seldom-used maintenance camera near the alley behind the Patterson house, showed something different. At 5:29 in the morning on the most recent anniversary, a figure stepped briefly into the frame, just past the fence line, carrying something in one hand and wearing a large hood that concealed their face. The figure reached toward the base of the streetlight, seemed to adjust something, then walked backward out of the frame without turning. Alan enlarged the image. He noticed the same type of ribbon that Erin had found hanging from her porch light was dangling from the person's hand just before they disappeared. Erin stared at the image and clenched her fists. The shoes, though partially obscured by shadow, appeared to be dark canvas sneakers with white soles. Alan checked the image against shoe types often sold in second-hand stores, then pulled archived footage from the flea market where Lucy's backpack had been found. One vendor in the background of the footage wore identical shoes. They cross-referenced his vendor license with the address he had submitted for tax records. It was a false address, but a utility account had once been registered there under the name Margot Hale. The connection was undeniable. They had a partial profile and they had movement. Alan issued a quiet alert to nearby counties and began coordinating with missing persons units in other states for similar cases. Meanwhile, Aaron received an email from an unknown address. It had no subject line. The message contained a single sentence. "If you want her back, listen closely next time." Aaron forwarded it to Alan immediately. He traced the IP address but found it had been rerouted through multiple servers across state lines, possibly even internationally. Still, it confirmed the sender was watching, still involved, still active. Aaron felt a tremor of fear at the thought that someone might be monitoring her home, her routines, her attempts to find Lucy. Alan installed a discreet surveillance system around her property and advised her to change her routines without making it obvious. She agreed, but deep down she knew that the only thing that would bring peace was finding Lucy herself, not hiding from whoever had taken her. A week later, a breakthrough arrived. A child's voice had been recorded on a neighbor's baby monitor near the woods behind the Patterson home. The monitor had picked up stray frequencies during a storm. In the background, faint but distinguishable, was a soft humming sound followed by what sounded like a girl whispering, "I miss my mom." Aaron played the clip over and over, convinced it was Lucy's voice. Alan sent it to a forensic audio lab. They confirmed with 86% probability that the voice belonged to Lucy Patterson, age-adjusted for expected growth. It was the first concrete auditory evidence of her existence since she vanished. The voice recording shifted the tone of the investigation from theoretical to active. No longer was Aaron Patterson clinging to abstract patterns or circumstantial fragments. Now there existed a measurable piece of Lucy, her voice emerging from the static like a signal from another world. Detective Alan Cray took the audio and coordinated with sound engineers to isolate the ambient background. Among the layered frequencies, they identified 3 significant sounds apart from the whisper. First was a dripping noise, steady and rhythmic, likely water against stone or rusted metal. Second was the faint hum of what resembled an old ventilation fan. Third and most intriguing was a low-frequency tone consistent with underground electrical systems. Alan correlated these findings with local infrastructure maps, focusing on areas where unused or abandoned buildings might match the audio profile. Old municipal archives revealed a cluster of storm shelters and maintenance tunnels near the western edge of Elmswood, long forgotten and sealed after urban expansion projects rerouted public systems. One tunnel stood out. It had once been connected to an auxiliary power station that was decommissioned in the early 2000s. The tunnel ran beneath a neighborhood now only partially occupied, its access points hidden behind chain link and overgrowth. Alan organized a quiet sweep of the site with a small team and brought Aaron with them to witness the search. As they approached the tunnel's entrance, long since hidden behind collapsed fencing and vines, the team cut through rusted metal with bolt cutters. A stale current of air escaped as the door creaked open. Inside, the passage was narrow and dark, the air thick with mildew. The walls were damp, lined with crumbling insulation, and the sound of dripping water matched the rhythm in the recording perfectly. Aaron followed close behind, her flashlight beam flickering as it touched fragments of the past, broken crates, old signs, a collapsed metal bench. 50 yards in, the team found a heavy steel hatch door, slightly ajar. Alan pushed it open and stepped into a small chamber no larger than a garden shed. The room was lined with old insulation panels and wires. In the corner, beneath a makeshift cot and a pile of blankets, they found a small shoe. Aaron dropped to her knees and picked it up. It was covered in dust, but clearly child-sized and pink, with a faded cartoon figure on the side. It matched the shoes Lucy had worn the day she vanished. Further search revealed wrappers from snack foods, a cracked plastic mirror, and a wall with faint writing scrawled in pencil. Among them were dozens of markings that resembled dates or tallies, as if someone had been counting days. One line read, "She will come one day," written over and over, descending in uneven handwriting that matched samples from Lucy's second-grade classroom. A forensic team arrived to catalog the scene, confirming through fiber and hair samples that Lucy had stayed in the space, though it appeared unoccupied now. Alan surmised it had served as a temporary holding place before relocation. The absence of fresh footprints suggested it had been in use for at least several months. Aaron remained crouched beside the cot for a long time, running her hand across the fabric, memorizing its texture, trying to absorb the closeness of her daughter's presence. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the tree leaves. As Alan helped Erin out of the tunnel, she turned toward the empty space behind them and whispered softly that she was not leaving without her. That evening, back at the station, Alan received a call from a retired officer who had been following the case since it resurfaced. He mentioned that during an old missing child investigation in a neighboring county, a boy had been found wandering near a similar tunnel system. The boy was dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise unharmed. He had no memory of his captor's face, but remembered a soft voice singing to him every night. The lullaby, he recalled, was almost identical to the one Lucy used to hum. Alan tracked the boy, now a teenager, and interviewed him with his parents' permission. The boy drew sketches of the space he had stayed in. One detail stood out. He described a painted ceiling with clouds and a small door that led to nowhere. When Alan showed Erin a photo of the room beneath the hatch, she pointed to a smudge on the ceiling and said Lucy used to draw clouds exactly like that with her markers. Alan continued tracing connections and uncovered that several of the shelters had been purchased quietly through shell companies tied to defunct nonprofits. One such nonprofit was registered to a woman named Denise Margot Hale. Further investigation into Hale's financial trail revealed she had used aliases across 3 states. One of her identities had rented properties under different names and shifted residence every 1 to 2 years. Satellite imagery showed that a rural farmhouse in one of those rental properties had recently been abandoned, though signs of activity such as garden tools, fresh tire marks, and water use remained on the property for weeks after the last confirmed sighting. Alan obtained a search warrant and dispatched a field unit to investigate. Inside the farmhouse, the team found more evidence of child presence. Books with faded inscriptions, drawings on the refrigerator, and a wall lined with strings holding paper cutouts shaped like hearts. One cutout bore the name Lucy in block letters. A diary found in the bedside drawer contained scattered notes that appeared delusional. Phrases like "purity must be protected" and "her voice is the only one I trust" repeated in different handwriting styles. Some entries seemed like transcriptions of things a child had said, but altered, as if rewritten through someone else's interpretation. Forensic linguists analyzed the entries and concluded at least 2 distinct voices were mimicked within the writing. A fingerprint lifted from the mirror matched a partial on record from Lucy's old-school enrollment forms. DNA from a toothbrush in the bathroom confirmed she had lived there. Back in Elmswood, Erin received the news in fragments. Each new update brought equal parts hope and dread. The idea that her daughter had been alive, perhaps frightened and hidden and controlled by someone with a fractured sense of love, left her breathless. But the truth was beginning to form shape and weight. They had evidence. They had timelines. They had the psychological profile of someone who had been orchestrating an elaborate existence in the shadows. Alan met with a federal liaison to expand the search to regions that had previously been overlooked, focusing on rural retreats and isolated shelters. In the days that followed, Erin took a walk behind the old garden shed, her footsteps slow and deliberate. She stopped at the spot where Lucy had vanished 6 years ago. The grass had grown back. The wood on the shed had aged, but the air still felt charged. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine Lucy's voice again, not the whisper on the tape, but the joyful sound of her playing on summer nights, laughing as she counted to 20 behind her hands. Erin stood there until the sun dipped low and shadows crept across the lawn. She felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Lucy had not been lost. She had been taken. And now, Erin was close to bringing her home. The following week unfolded with the same intensity as a fever dream, every moment threaded with purpose and urgency. Erin no longer walked as a grieving mother unsure of her place in the world. Now she moved with deliberate steps, her voice no longer fragile but sharpened by focus, her eyes alert to the smallest of details. Detective Alan Cray arranged for a federal task force to be brought in, their presence subtle but significant. Together they built an operational profile around Margot Hale's movements, habits, and psychological markers. She was no longer simply a person of interest. She had become the singular variable around which Lucy's story had been orbiting. Every confirmed location Margot had lived in over the past 7 years was cataloged, including farmhouses, rented trailers, and unregistered structures on private land. A pattern emerged. She avoided cities, moved often, and frequently left behind traces of children who were never officially documented. What concerned the team most was that her trail, once sporadic and erratic, had grown more controlled over the past year, suggesting an increased desire to remain hidden. Aaron listened to every briefing with a stillness that seemed born of a kind of practiced endurance, nodding at each point, absorbing every name, date, and GPS coordinate. She contributed where she could, pointing out inconsistencies or oddities in the paper trail others had missed. Her mind, long trained by years of isolation and relentless research, now operated with the clarity of someone for whom every second counted. Then came the call that shifted the ground beneath them. A 12-year-old boy named Owen was found wandering in a rural park nearly 90 miles from Elmswood. He had been reported missing 4 months earlier from a neighboring state. When park rangers approached him, he seemed confused but calm, carrying a small tin lunchbox filled with crackers, an apple, and a folded drawing. The boy was dehydrated but in otherwise good health. When taken to the hospital, he asked about a girl named Lucy. The attending nurse, having been briefed on regional alerts, notified the authorities. Alan drove out immediately and interviewed the boy himself. Owen told a story that was both simple and surreal. He said he had lived with a woman he called Miss M for several months. She moved him often, from house to cabin to trailer. Sometimes they stayed in places with other children. Sometimes they were alone. He said Lucy had been with him for a time, mostly quiet, always kind, always drawing. He said she told him stories when he could not sleep. She said she used to live in a white house with a porch swing. Alan asked him if Lucy had ever tried to leave. The boy said she had once, during a rainstorm, but Miss M caught her and made her stay inside for many days after that. He described a hidden room in the floor, one with drawings on the walls and old books stacked along the edges. He said Lucy used to trace her name in the dust with her finger. The boy's folded drawing was a picture of a girl with long brown hair and a red bracelet on her wrist. Written above the drawing in uneven handwriting was the name Lucy. Alan took the paper and laid it on the table in front of Erin later that night. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched it. The bracelet in the drawing matched one she had given Lucy for her 7th birthday. A red woven band with a single gold bead in the center. Only one had been made. It had never been recovered. Alan asked Owen if he remembered any names or signs. The boy said he remembered the sound of a wind chime every night before dinner and a road sign with the letters KR. That fragment became their next clue. The team reviewed maps for any towns, intersections, or roads containing the letters K are within a 100-mile radius of the last confirmed location. They found a rural route called Marker Hill Road in a forested section near the border. Satellite imagery revealed a small, isolated structure with a tin roof and a carport partially hidden under trees. Records showed no official ownership. The land had been part of an estate sale years earlier but never fully processed through state systems. Alan organized a low-visibility recon team and drove to the site. They arrived just before dawn, careful to avoid any noise. The house sat quietly among tall pines, a weathered structure with faded paint and boarded windows. A rusted swing set leaned sideways in the overgrown yard. The wind chime mentioned by Owen could be heard faintly in the breeze, its tone matching exactly the one recorded on the baby monitor months earlier. They waited. Just before 7, a figure stepped outside. A woman, thin, with graying hair tied back under a scarf, wearing a long coat despite the heat. She moved with a slow, deliberate gait, scanning the yard before opening a side door. She disappeared inside. Alan made the call. The team moved in. They breached the door with precision. Inside, the air smelled of dust and herbs. The rooms were sparse but clean. In the far corner of the main room, behind a large bookcase, they found a concealed door leading to a narrow staircase. At the bottom was a single room with a cot, a desk, and drawings taped to the wall. In the center of the room sat a girl, her knees pulled to her chest, her face turned toward the noise. She looked up slowly. Her eyes met Alan's. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply asked if her mother was upstairs. Alan stepped forward and knelt beside her. He said her name. Lucy. The girl nodded once. Her voice cracked as she whispered that she had been waiting for her mother to come back for her. They brought her upstairs. Aaron was already at the scene, restrained by officers who had been instructed not to let her enter until the area was secure. Alan signaled them. Aaron ran. She saw her daughter standing in the doorway, pale but alive, her frame thinner, her posture wary. Lucy looked at her mother and blinked slowly, then took one step forward. Then another. Aaron fell to her knees and opened her arms. Lucy dropped into them without a word. The two of them clung together, time collapsing in a single moment of warmth and disbelief. The days following Lucy's recovery passed not in a wave of celebration but in a careful hush, as though the entire world were afraid to speak too loudly and disturb a fragile balance that had finally been restored after 6 long years. The Patterson home, once frozen in time by absence and loss, now found itself quietly reawakening. Every room had become a threshold Lucy crossed slowly and cautiously, her presence at once familiar and foreign. She walked through the hallway with the soft steps of someone remembering what it felt like to exist freely. She paused at doorways, glanced at pictures on the walls, touched objects with the reverence of someone unsure if the past had truly returned. Erin did not push. She followed gently, often saying nothing, simply sharing space with the daughter she had dreamed about for more nights than she could count. There was no dramatic moment of reconnection, no instant flood of conversation. Lucy spoke only in fragments, brief observations or hesitant questions, most of them focused on her surroundings rather than herself. She asked if her old bed was still hers. She asked if the neighborhood still had fireworks on the 4th of July. She asked if she had missed school. Erin answered each question with the steadiness of someone who had practiced for this moment in her mind 1,000 different ways and now understood that what mattered most was not what had happened, but what still could. The police and medical staff worked around the clock in the days after Lucy's rescue. She was examined by doctors, interviewed by child psychologists, and slowly reintroduced to everyday routines under careful observation. Her vitals were stable. She was malnourished but responsive. Her eyes remained guarded but not hollow. She remembered names. She recognized her mother. She spoke of places she had been, but always vaguely, never specifying locations, never naming the woman who had kept her. When asked about Margot Hale, she looked down and traced her finger along the hem of her shirt. Erin sat in on the sessions, her heart breaking with every answer that was given and every silence that stretched just a little too long. Lucy had been taught not to speak of certain things. That much was clear. She had internalized rules of survival, ones crafted carefully over time by someone who had needed her silence more than her voice. The details she did share painted a picture of dislocation. She spoke of dark rooms and quiet music, of traveling at night and being told the world outside was dangerous. She described the routine of isolation, of reading old books by flashlight, of counting birds from behind curtained windows, of drawing clouds on walls she was never allowed to leave. Erin brought her home and began the slow process of reintroducing life in pieces. The first night back, she made Lucy's favorite dinner from memory, but Lucy barely touched her plate. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table and drew in silence, her pencil sketching slow, deliberate shapes that Erin could not yet recognize. That night, Lucy asked to sleep with the door open. Erin agreed without hesitation. She sat outside the room for hours, just beyond the threshold, listening to the rhythm of Lucy's breathing, assuring herself with each rise and fall of her daughter's chest that this was real. The days became routines. Morning walks around the yard. Afternoons reading together on the porch. Evenings listening to music quietly in the background. Lucy began to speak more often. She asked about her old school, about her friend Ellie, about the changes in the house. Erin answered everything. When Lucy asked why the lavender ribbon was still tied to the porch light, Erin hesitated. She told her it had been left every year on the day she disappeared. Lucy said nothing, only stared at it for a long time, and then walked back inside. The investigators returned with more questions. They wanted Lucy's help to understand Margot Hale's methods, her movements, her network. But Lucy rarely gave them more than short answers. Erin watched the frustration grow behind Alan's calm expressions. He knew time was limited. Margot was still at large. Every delay increased the risk she would disappear permanently. Yet he also knew pushing Lucy too hard would fracture something that had only just begun to heal. He spoke with Erin privately and suggested they try indirect methods. Use art. Use memories. See what surfaces on its own. Erin agreed. She placed drawing pads around the house. She left small objects from the past in places Lucy might find. One afternoon, Lucy found a photo album under her pillow. She flipped through it without speaking, then placed it back under the pillow. That night, she left a sketch on the kitchen table. It showed a small cabin in the woods, a van parked outside, and a tall figure standing near the edge of a hill. Erin handed it to Alan. He studied the trees in the background and compared them with known forest topographies in the region. 2 days later, they identified a state park with nearly identical terrain. Surveillance footage showed a woman matching Margot's description purchasing supplies at a nearby gas station 3 days after Lucy's rescue. The car she drove was not registered. The plates were stolen. But her face was unmistakable. Alan presented the photo to Lucy. She looked at it for a long time, then nodded. Erin reached across the table and held her daughter's hand, her grip trembling just slightly. That night, Lucy asked to sleep in her own bed. Erin tucked her in and sat beside her until she fell asleep. The next morning, Lucy asked for pancakes. Erin made them without hesitation. It was the first meal she finished completely. The following week, Lucy began talking about the night she tried to escape. She described crawling out of a basement window and running through tall grass. She remembered the way the sky looked, how bright the moon had been, how cold the ground felt under her bare feet. She spoke of hiding behind trees, of hearing her name whispered through the woods, and of hands pulling her back into the dark. Erin listened without interrupting, her throat tight, her heart aching. Lucy said that after that night, she stopped trying. She stopped hoping. Until she heard a new voice on the other side of the door. A male voice. Calm. Different. She said she thought it might have been someone new. Someone coming to find her. Erin asked if that was when she began leaving signs. Lucy nodded. She said the ribbons were not always left by Margot. Some of them were hers. She left them where she knew her mother would see. Erin stared at her daughter and felt tears fall silently onto her hands. All those years, Lucy had been signaling. She had been reaching out. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the Patterson household grew steadier, like the slow healing of a wound once thought permanent. Lucy no longer flinched at every sound. She began to laugh again, quietly at first, as though testing its weight in the world. Erin heard it while they were watering the plants one morning, the soft breath of joy rising unexpectedly between sentences. She did not say anything then. She simply smiled and kept pouring the water, her hands steady, her heart thudding in her chest like it had found its purpose again. They began walking farther from home, first around the neighborhood, then to the small park where Lucy had once played as a child. She remembered the swings. She remembered the bench where Erin used to sit with coffee while watching her. She said it felt smaller now. Erin said sometimes things shrink not because they have changed, but because we have grown. Lucy nodded and kicked at the gravel beneath her shoes. She did not ask when she would go back to school. Erin did not bring it up. Instead, they focused on now. They planted flowers in the backyard. They repainted Lucy's bedroom. They opened the windows and let in the light that neither of them had truly felt in years. The investigation continued, but it no longer consumed every moment. Alan kept Erin informed quietly. The latest lead on Margot Hale had gone cold. The cabin she was seen near now abandoned, her trail once again fragmented. Erin felt the familiar ache of unfinished endings, but she did not let it grow roots. She understood now that healing did not require every question to be answered. Some people vanished because they knew how. Others stayed lost because they wanted to. But Lucy had been found. She had returned not as the same child, but as someone still becoming. And that was enough. One afternoon in late September, Lucy asked to visit the old path behind the house, the one that led through the woods where she had disappeared all those years ago. Erin hesitated, then agreed. They walked together, leaves crunching beneath their feet, sunlight slipping through branches like threads of gold. Lucy stopped near the shed, the spot that had once been just another part of their backyard and had since become a scar neither of them could name. She stood quietly, her eyes scanning the trees, then the ground, then the sky. She said she remembered the game. She remembered hiding. She remembered a voice calling her name and footsteps that did not belong to anyone she knew. Erin asked if she wanted to leave. Lucy said no. She just wanted to see if it felt the same. After a long pause, she turned and said she used to dream about this place. She used to imagine standing here and feeling safe again. Erin said maybe now she could. They stayed a while longer before walking back to the house, the silence between them no longer heavy but gentle, like the pause between verses in a song that was still being written. News of Lucy's return had spread beyond Elmswood. Messages came from families of other missing children, some offering hope, others seeking answers. Erin responded to as many as she could, not as an expert, but as someone who had lived through the space no one wants to name. She joined forums not to search anymore, but to guide, to share what it meant to hold on without breaking. Her story became a kind of anchor for others still drifting. Not a promise of rescue, but proof that the light can last longer than the dark. Lucy began attending therapy sessions at her own pace. Her drawings became more detailed, no longer just fragments of memory, but small scenes filled with color and motion. One day, she drew a picture of herself standing beside her mother on a porch, a ribbon tied to the railing and a small bird in the sky above them. She showed it to Erin without explanation. Aaron framed it and hung it in the hallway. It was not what had been lost that defined them anymore. It was what had survived. Months passed. The seasons turned. Snow came and then melted again. On the anniversary of Lucy's disappearance, Erin woke early out of habit. She stepped onto the porch just before dawn. For the first time in years, there was no ribbon tied to the light. Instead, the door behind her opened, and Lucy stepped out holding a cup of tea. She handed it to her mother and sat beside her, their shoulders touching. Erin asked if she was okay. Lucy said she was not sure yet, but she was here. Erin nodded. They sat in silence as the sky shifted from black to blue, the first light catching the tops of the trees. It was not a celebration. It was not a closure. It was simply presence. And sometimes that was more than enough. Margot Hale was never found. Her trail disappeared as quietly as it had begun. But the fear she cast no longer had the same shape. Erin no longer jumped at every shadow. Lucy no longer looked over her shoulder each time the wind moved. They had taken back the story, piece by piece, word by word. In a journal Erin kept by her bedside, she wrote a single sentence every morning. Today is not a memory. It is a beginning. She never missed a day. Lucy asked once why she wrote it. Erin said it was to remind herself that every day she woke up with her daughter under the same roof was a miracle she never expected to live. Lucy smiled, took the journal, and added her own line. And every day I see you, I remember that I was never alone. The house stayed quiet most nights, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness but from peace. There were still questions, still echoes of the past, still moments when the silence inside Lucy stretched long and uncertain. But there was also laughter. There were warm meals. There were evenings spent reading side by side. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. The light above the door flickered once and then stayed on. They did not tie another ribbon. They did not need to. Some signals are meant to bring someone home. Others are meant to remind you they are already there. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more. What do you think really happened to Lucy during those 6 years? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.